Here it's May 11th. We've got 50 actions for 50 years for the Women's Caucus. So what we'll do is we'll have the presentations and then we'll have our questions and discussion afterwards, just for the interest in time, because we have multiple presentations going. So if you would just kind of note questions that you'd like to pose, that way we can get to all of them at the end. And we'll have our closing remarks with that discussion as well. And I'm going to do my best in terms of admitting people into, because I know that there are people that are planning to come, but they might just be coming a little bit on the late side. So I'll just do my best in terms of manning the Zoom platform here. So with that, Christopher, would you like to start your presentation? I can share your slides if you'd like, or if you'd like to share them.
Let me get see if I can click into this.
Okay, so you'll select go into share and then select your, there you go.
Okay. Oh, one moment. Here we go. Okay. Great. Great. Thank you. Thank you very much, Anne, for including me in this. It's a great honor. I've met Anne many years ago at the Art Barge when she was an art education student, possibly, and took some classes there. And I've been there since 1975. I was Victor and Mabel D'Amico's assistant. I'm now president of the board. And it's just a fascinating legacy that I'm glad that Anne was able to pick up on and realize that it should be taken to a larger audience. So we're here to talk about Mabel D'Amico, Mabel Burkhead D'Amico. She was born in April 1909.
Christopher?
Yes.
I'm not sure. It's not loading on our end. I don't know if you can see the slides on your end.
I can see the slides on my end, I guess. Yes, I'm seeing a screen.
Okay, I think it might be just maybe just a bandwidth thing. I can why don't we do this? Well, is it just me, or are other people seeing a loading?
I can't see.
Okay,
so
loading.
We are not seeing it.
Okay, so how about do you mind if I share your slides?
Can you do it? Yeah, and then
I'll do that, and then
we'll
can
just click as we
tell me
want to
when
move
go.
forward. The old,
All right,
if that works, yeah.
You stop share. Let me see. All right, let me just open it so that I have it here. Okay, there we go. And we go to the very beginning because I looked through them. I couldn't help myself. All right. How is that?
Chris might need to stop share on his end. I still have his screen loading.
Stop share. Okay.
Are we okay now?
Yep.
You got it?
Wonderful.
Yep. But you need to go into slideshow mode because it's really it's small right now. So if you can, and if you can make it your full screen.
There.
She's doing it.
Oh, she's doing it. Okay.
Yep.
Let me see, full screen. There. Oh, yeah, there we go. Okay, how are we?
Still getting a smaller version.
Oh, really? Okay. Let me just, that's strange. I have the full thing here. All right.
Sorry for this.
No problem.
No.
I just have it as a PDF, and so I'm looking.
That's better. Yeah, it's not full screen, but it's much bigger right now.
How's
Perfect.
that?
Right there.
Okay.
Go for
That's
it.
good.
All right.
And so you'll just click through as I
Yeah,
say.
so you
Sure.
tell me. Yeah, you tell me.
Sure. Well, let's just go right to the first slide.
Yep.
here we are. Here's Mabel, born in April 1909 with her mother. And her name is Mabel D'Amico. She was her mother's name was Mabel Deal, and Mabel D'Amico was named Mabel Deal Burkhead after her mother and her father. Um, which I think is quite unique. Instead of having the man, they only had one child, and so they obviously decided to name Mabel, giving Mabel Jr. in a sense the mother's first and last name, and then the father's last name. So that's, I think, is a wonderful attribute right there. That's sending her into a little bit of an individuality. Um, and I also want to state, and I've said this to Anne, is that Mabel did not consider herself a feminist or a woman artist. She really wanted to be considered an artist, and she also really wanted to be considered a found object construction artist. She wasn't a painter. She wasn't a sculptor. She wasn't a printer of anything. She obviously got very intrigued with found object construction making. And so this little presentation, we're going to see historical slides of her life. And then the next slide.
Oops.
There you go, is her artwork. So it's going to be historical and then an artwork piece. Mabel definitely was an artist educator. And this is probably a piece that was done later in her life. So we're starting with her the beginning of her life, and then we're going at the end of her life with her artwork and working in reverse in a sense a little bit. This is called My World, and it's a photo collage image transfer that she ended up taking a class at the Art Barge and learning how to make a traditional image transfer. However, she then let it, once she got back in her studio, she just let it really rip, and she obviously let be influenced by the world around her with the water that is around where her house is located out here in Eastern Long Island, and then also the greater world and the greater universe also that she included in the whole piece. Next. She was born in White Plains, New York. An only child. She learned to read when she was 4 years old, and she was very inspired by nature, animals, artwork. She learned to read by the time she was 4 years old. She learned to be rather self-sufficient. She grew up in a Victorian type of era where she was to be seen and never to be heard. So she really had to obviously gain some sort of self-independence as an individual in that harsh sort of adult world. So she really found herself through the sensations that life can, give you with nature, education, and, artwork and color. Next slide. A box construction that she was very influenced by. She went to early Joseph Cornell exhibitions in the 1930s in New York City. So that artwork was totally original and one of a kind. And it wasn't painting, it wasn't drawing, it wasn't traditional sculpture. So it obviously must have really connected to her. She also didn't like to play with dolls. She had them, but she said they weren't much fun. So I think later in life, this is a box collection from the 1960s. She used doll pieces. She learned to play with then the doll pieces much, much later in life. And this is just a construction piece of 4 heads and obviously all different directions. Next. Here she is in a high school photograph. She graduated from White Plains in the 1920s and then went off to college. Next. This is a tempera on paper. When she did paint, she only painted with water pigments. She was not an oil type of pigment painter whatsoever, oil on canvas. I think she loved the idea of water and how fluid obviously it is, and then what you can really do with tempera watercolor pigments, and then much later, like the first image transfer was then done in acrylics that were perfected by the 1990s. This shows, though, a fish factory out here in Amagansett, Long Island, that was filled with, boats that you see there with riggings, old buildings. People used to catch menhaden fish by the tons and would process the fish, squeezing the oil out of it for industrial lubrication, cooking the carcasses down for fertilizer. So there was great activity in all of these little factories that were on the eastern end of Long Island. And she came to eastern Long Island with Victor in the late 1930s, sort of as a getaway, I think, with their relationship, to get out of New York, and to do painting on the location and just get to a very industrial type of facility like this that gave you lots of subject matter to work on. Next. Here she is going off to college in the late 1920s. She went to Pratt. Her mother was an art teacher, so she was obviously, again, very inspired by her role model of her mother, not only in name, but in practice. And I don't know where her mother got her education, but Mabel did go to Pratt, and there learned how to paint and weld and weave, print, and just construct a very, industrial type of a wonderful education. She graduated in 1929. Next. A construction using acrylic resin pieces that was rather in the mode in the 1960s. But this is made up of hand-cut colonial nails that then were stuck into the wet resin, and which was also embedded with various pigments and marbles, and put on then a rusted stand to be a 3D piece. The view in the background is the view from her home here in Amagansett. Next. She met Victor D'Amico in the late 1930s. He was recently hired to be the founding director of the education department at the Museum of Modern Art. She was on an advisory panel there at the museum to help direct the museum's studies with art education. And both were students of the progressive education movement of the 1920s. And so they obviously found a very definite professional relationship, but also a very personal relationship was created. They came out to that fish factory, as I said, to get away. And then in the 1940s, they ended up finding a building site here in Amagansett that somebody had started to build, but they abandoned the site. So Victor and Mabel took over the property. And because there was nobody around to know how to build a modernist house, which meant open spaces, glass wall windows, and very functional interiors, lack of ornamentation, etc. They learned to build the house themselves. If you can build a construction, if you can make an artwork, you can then also just expand the project and the concept into a house. And here you see him hammering away at some concrete, and she's got a pad and some obviously taking possibly measurements. But you can also see that it's not blue jeans and t-shirt era, and they're both very happy. If you can imagine building your home with your spouse, what a fun ordeal that must have been for them all. Next. She was not totally political or an activist, but she would make artwork depending on what was happening in the news of those days. And the photograph on the left is a found wooden toilet seat that she then made a portrait of Richard Nixon and put it inside the toilet seat. So there's a bit of definitely a comment on that. And then the photograph on the right-hand side are her tools that you see here that are on display in the studio, where the yellow tape is designating her tools, so they're not distinguished from Victor's tools. Next. Here she is in her studio with some constructions in the background. Plants also very present, living, a very organic type of a life. The combination of having the outside, inside, inside, outside was always very important. Next. A little box construction made out of just a drawer, and then a box that she constructed, and then also with little birds that she, again, very inspired by nature as a child, and then also brought that into her adult life. There's many birds out here, all types of shorebirds and songbirds. It's migratory. She knew the founders of Audubon, so she was very well interested in bird life. Next. Here she is inside the room that I'm sitting in, also with the windows that they constructed, with some more of her her constructions on the tables and her bottle collection and the view outside the windows also. Next. Not only did she learn to build the house and also everything, but she also made all of her own clothing, her jewelry pieces, furnishing pieces in the house, cookware, dinnerware, etc. Very much a Renaissance woman in a sense. So she wasn't just, stuck in one, oil on canvas or a painting that way. She really learned to embellish her whole life on all levels, many, many levels. So the house also shows that. Next. Later in life, they reconstructed part of the house that faces south into, you could buy a greenhouse material. And again, her inspiration of plants expanded so that she could have a wonderful greenhouse conservatory studio also. And here she's sitting there in the 1980s, mid 1980s. This is soon after Victor died in 1987, just surrounded by plants and artwork, and made a wonderful southern studio space for her. Next. And again, one of her later pieces that shows a bird construction that comes off as very prehistoric in a sense, extremely modern, pared down to the simplest amount of materials, the simplest line. Again, very influenced by nature, the world around her, and very important to create making something happening and letting something happening. It was all about learning. Life is all about learning. And so it's very important that we all continue to look that way and to keep being educated. Next. And our final slide is, here she is later in life. She died in 1998, just a few months shy of her 90th birthday. But it's been a great legacy to be able to preserve her house, her archives, her collection of all of her artwork, her house, and her lesson plans, so that we can share them with the public and all that are interested. And so again, a great honor to be included in an art educational format like this. Thank you, Anne.
Thank you so much, Chris. And we'll get into a little bit more of that, but Chris is actually sitting in the D'Amico house right now. And I just have so many fond memories of going there again and again and again. It's just such a beautiful space and such an amazing woman. So let's see. I've had, you might have seen a little bit of distraction here. I've been kind of like texting people who are having a hard time getting in for some reason, but we're going to just move it to, there's a message here. Fascinating, ideal for Mother's Day weekend. I totally agree. So Dan, would you like to share your screen?
I'm ready to go. Yes, I will share my screen. Make sure, give me a verbal thumbs up or a thumbs up that you can see my screen. We're
can see
good.
it.
Very good. Awesome. Everything that I'm sharing today, I'm going to go speed round through a 5-year journey. But everything is available on this site. So I will share this at the end as well. So let me start with a prelude. I'll introduce myself. I'm Dan Napolitano, formerly of Alfred University. If you don't know, Alfred University, internationally known for ceramic and glass. You can see some of the work behind me from my new home in Brooklyn, New York. But in my role at Alfred University, my background is I have a BFA in art education, as well as a master's in college student development. So I look for opportunities for art education on the college level, as well as being a chief diversity officer, how to integrate equity and inclusion in some of the work we do. So the picture to the left is a program that we did through SUNY, a bunch of SUNY schools, but we had kind of a reputation of going around and building mosaics and having people paint one tile and a big image of a mosaic, and it was really about the conversation, about the topic of a mosaic. We've done mosaics of Angela Davis and presented it to her. We got to meet Stan Lee and present him with a mosaic. The mosaics you see on the left were of different leaders during the 1917 race riot in East St. Louis, and we kind of told a narrative story about that. And we received funding from SUNY to support this as a statewide initiative. And one of the other partners that we had up in Rochester, New York, which is about an hour north of Alfred, is the Susan B. Anthony House. And we've done a lot with Susan B. Anthony House and Museum. So I'm going to take you back real quick. I'm going to keep these really brief. But in 2019, we decided to do a tribute to Susan B. Anthony, wearing football jerseys that had Susan B. Anthony's face on them, in the parking lot of a Buffalo Bills preseason game at St. John Fisher College. And this whole concept of trying to have the enthusiasm for women's equality and the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment coming up, we decided that we were going to treat them like modern day superstars. And you can see these pictures. What followed that was we decided it was a great idea, and we would go to different football games and celebrate icons from that region and get fans to paint tiles. Now, as you can imagine, drunk football fans in parking lots and talking about feminist ideals and whether or not they're a feminist or not actually put us in danger in some instances. We did not have permission. We went without permission into football stadium parking lots and set up like we were tailgating for a barbecue, and we made art. So all along, we were promoting the anniversary of the 19th Amendment, and we visited 5 or 6 football stadiums, and we tried to get the NFL to cover us. In the NFL, we said, listen, you have a history of players with domestic violence. We want to talk about equity. We want to talk about promoting these women. They did not want to touch it. We ended up, like I said, creating 6 different tributes throughout the East Coast, and we did not think we were going to hear anything more from them. And then COVID happened. And when COVID happened, there was a shortage of content, and there was the NFL draft got canceled. And they gave us a call and said, can you tell us more about your program? So it was a flip because they needed content. And we designed this to be, instead of just going and tailgating, we designed this to be a fake NFL draft. And I'm going to play you a very quick, I'm going to do a new share. And I can see your face, so just give me the heads up if you can successfully see it when I put it on. I'm just going to play 30 seconds from this. And should have, let me actually make sure I have the sound. I'm going to do share screen, share sound. Here we go. Just going to play the intro to this.
On April 23rd, draft history was made with a very different cast of characters.
So Cincinnati, Gina, I'll pass it to you.
With the first pick, Cincinnati honors Doris Day.
Houston honors Selena.
San Francisco honors Dolores Herta.
Art Force 5, a student organization from Alfred University, channeled the 2020 NFL Draft to honor 32 iconic American women. The result, the first annual Women's Empowerment Draft.
Okay, so stop that share. And what we ended up doing was this is during COVID, the first months of COVID, we found college students from across the country. We produced these jerseys. I want to produce a Mabel jersey one day now that I've met Chris. Yeah. But we tried this program out, and the NFL filmed it, and the NFL made a 3-minute promotional piece out of it that I would not call activism. I would call it a puff piece, to be honest with you, because they made themselves look great. They segued later in the video onto opportunities for women in the NFL. They posted on the NFL's website. Men commented about the NFL being too woke. Somebody actually thought that the Buffalo Bills had drafted Susan B. Anthony to play on the team, which just shows kind of the ignorance of some of the trolling that went on. And it was a great start of a program that we decided that we wanted to take it in different ways. And that's why this program, this session is called The Evolution of. So first year, I already gave you enough talk, but here's all of that. The second year of the program was, we did not have the NFL sponsorship. We had this great concept. We had the art making, where discussions could occur about the women. And we asked every SUNY partner that we had, we found 30 SUNY partners, and we asked them each to pick an icon. Meanwhile, in addition to the jerseys and in addition to the art making, we had trading cards. So we had these trading cards here in my hand that people could learn about the icons. Each SUNY school picked an icon. The two that I put up on the screen are icons that were personal. One was an NAACP leader that Rockland County wanted to celebrate. Another one was a deceased HEOP, like the Higher Education Opportunity Program director that had just recently passed. And then some schools, the Tompkins Cortland Community College wanted Michelle Obama. No connection to the school, not an alum, but they just wanted to celebrate somebody on a national level. Again, we created a video. It had much, much more of an activist feel without the NFL's involvement. We talked about Breonna Taylor. We talked about the Me Too movement. It really, and the video, I'm not going to play for that because you can see it on the website, but it had a very different feel. By year 3, we evolved the program in each SUNY school. This is my favorite year. Each SUNY school partnered with a K through 12 school. And we went to NAEA's, our regional, NYSADA, and we recruited teachers from schools that were named after women. We identified 28 schools of the about 80 schools in New York State that are named for women. About 4% of our schools in New York State are named for women, opposed to about 20 for men. And we tried to honor their legacy. Some, even the art educators, didn't know that their school was named for a woman. They just knew the last name. They had no idea it was named for a woman. But to elevate that name, to have the school spirit, you will notice there is no school in New York State named for an Indigenous woman. There is no school named for an Asian woman. There's no school named for a trans woman, which is probably not surprising to you. And we asked schools that weren't named for women if they wanted to participate. We wanted to fill this void. And a school from the Seneca Nation, Salamanca, elevated a local icon and language teacher right here to, hopefully you can see my arrow moving around. And then I had a small school out of Jamestown, New York, who said, we want to be in this, and we have students, seniors who are trans, who want to be, we want in Jamestown, New York, we want to honor a trans icon. And they honored Marsha P. Johnson, which was fabulous. We also had schools that were in the midst of transitioning their school name. Dr. Blaniva Bond School in Niagara Falls, they seized this as an opportunity to embrace the name change. They were fantastic. You can see a mural that they painted. But everything from where having sports teams wear the jerseys, to murals, to the trading cards, absolutely fantastic. We did a five school tour of New York City over the college students' spring break, and it was fabulous. I left Alfred University at this point, and I moved to New York City and got a job at the new school in Manhattan. And this is kind of where you see a little bit of a transition. The artwork previously was designed by an alum of Alfred who was a student a couple years prior, so she kept making them for us. In 2023, we love the idea of sports combined with school namesakes. So we identified 30 incredible schools around the country that were named for women, and we asked them to participate. And here's some of the ones that really like embraced it. School teachers built lesson plans around it. They did their own art projects and activities. These are students at the new school. And this year, I to be honest, I felt like this year, I had about 10 of the 30 schools that really embraced it and did some great stuff. Every day of the month of March, I should have said that earlier, is we dedicate to a different icon in a different school, and we ask people to post. And we try to get the NBA involved by finding teams like we did the first year that were near NBA cities. But we only got one NBA team to share our post. That was the Cleveland Cavaliers. So now I'm a Cleveland Cavalier fan. But it's the whole concept of trying to elevate these icons like celebrities. And then one more story, I think I'm doing okay on time, Ann, is this past year was the 100th anniversary of something called the Civic Club Dinner. Jessie Redmond Fawcett, who is pictured here on the left, had a book release coming up, and she had a party planned, and it was taken over by leaders of the NAACP and the Urban League, and they turned a small book release party into an epic, about 150 guests, lots of white publishers. Jessie was supposed to be the sole star, but she was the 10th speaker. She was like the finale, and a lot of other voices and writers and poets of the Harlem Renaissance, but 7 out of 10 were there. And Jessie kind of got her spotlight stolen, but she still, the papers reported on that she was kind of like the premier speaker of the night, but she was bitter about it because it was hijacked. But that event goes down in the history of the Harlem Renaissance as the most, one of the most pivotal dates of getting the voices of the Harlem Renaissance out. So we created an event. This is through NYSADA's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee rather than Alfred University. We created a program with 30 icons of the Harlem Renaissance, and we had some fabulous partnerships. About a dozen art teachers from NYSADA did incredible lesson plans. You can see a couple of examples here of a quilt, and you can see like little book reports of the icons that were fantastic. So I'm going to leave with the question is what we do next. We've had 5 great years. We've evolved the program. We've had different partnerships. The great thing about the 5th year was that there was a common thread of all the icons. It wasn't just the fact that there were a bunch of schools that were named for women. The program, there's been times where the program has been intended to get people to consider changing their name of the school. Like as I mentioned, schools are not often named for women. And just yesterday in the news, 2 schools in Virginia changed their names back to Confederate general names that they had changed prior. So what my hope for this program is that if someone is considering a name change, that we would be somebody that they would contact to honor new names, and that maybe Mabel could have a school out in the Hamptons named after her, and we could partner. So that was a real quick speed by version of it, but I'm happy to take questions at the end with everybody else. And thanks for having me, Ann.
You're welcome. That's amazing. And what a great idea, Mabel D'Amico draft. Let's
watch the video. I didn't play all my videos, but the video I'll put it in the chat for later. But the video of the students celebrating their own school namesake is by far my favorite. So I will share that later.
It's so inspiring.
Thanks.
Okay, Simon, do you want to share your screen? And
Yes.
thank you.
Is it okay? Okay. Thank you everyone for having me. Today I'm going to talk about Kanoon and art education in the 1960s and 1970s, Iranian women's role in cultural advancement, Lili Amirarjmand and her legacy, Kanoon. Okay. Kanoon or Institute for Intellectual Development of Children and Young Adults. In Persian language, the word Kanoon means hub, hangout, and club. I don't know why. Okay, yeah, it's okay. It made sense to all Iranian girls and boys aged 3 to 15 going to Kanoon for watching a puppet show or borrowing a book or attending a pottery class. Were among the best memories of Iranian children in my generation. The idea of creating a library for children and teenagers to spend their free time by Mrs. Lily Amirarjman, who had completed her studies in the field of librarianship and children's literature in America, received the attention and approval of Queen Farah Diba. And in 1965, Kanoon, with the aim of spreading progressive ideas among the youth of the country in a way of establishing urban and rural libraries, publishing books for different age groups, and establishing music, theater, filmmaking, Fine Arts and Visual Art Training Center under the management of Lily was founded. Kanoon is one of the most progressive institutions for the cultures, education, art, and creativity of Iranian children and young adults. I try to put some pictures and try to talk about them very quickly. For example, this is an opening show of an art show related to one of the Kanoon's library, Farah Diba and Lili Amirarjman attending these shows. And this picture is a Farah with some children's. They were members of Kanoon, and she have a very famous sentence about Kanoon: "A seed planted with love will never be destroyed." She consumed Kanoon as this seed which planted with love. And in this picture, she's talking and working with boys and girls together alongside each other. Or for example, some theater groups and some music groups, they work with each other. And in this picture, it's a picture where when they were trying to publishing some books, and this picture related to one of the first books that was published in Kanoon publication. Kanoon has a very beautiful symbol, Kanoon bird. This symbol was designed by Mohammad Pouladi. Lili Amir Arjman talked about this symbol, that it is a bird that sits on a book, and its open mouth has a message that this bird is hungry and young and waiting to be fed, trained, and educated. These birds sit on an open book, which represent Kanoon libraries all around Iran. This is Lili Amirarjman. She is a visionary founder and champion behind Kanoon. She was also the director of the National Library of Iran and an associate professor at Tehran University. She formed Kanoon by building a network of permanent and mobile libraries across Iran to promote culture and education for Iranian children and young adults. She was the first person to have a master's degree in librarianship in Iran. She started her work in Kanoon with only 3 employees, and the day she had to leave Kanoon and also leave the country, she had 2,400 employees working for her in Kanoon. This picture is one of the Kanoon's library. I want to talk about it. The architecture of Kanoon was same in all the country, and even in the very small city that I was a member of Kanoon. These chairs and these round tables and also very colorful areas. Actually, at first, they didn't imagine that one day the library would turn into a cultural centers. They were just after building a library, but after some times and some constructions, they came to this conclusion that one or two library was not enough, and they had to build other libraries in Tehran and other cities in Iran. They couldn't imagine that the work they were doing would expand to this level, but gradually with its popularity among children, things start to happen by themselves, and many libraries were established and built in Iran. For example, this is they started with establishing 21 libraries in Tehran and then other cities and other villages. For example, this is an opening of one of the libraries, number 20 in Tehran. Or this picture is an opening of library 20, number 21 in Tehran. The opening ceremony of these libraries, for example, in this picture, Farah Diba, Amir Arjmand, and Farrokhroh Parsa at right. She was an Iranian physician. I want to talk about her very quickly, educator and parliamentarian. She served as Minister of Education, and she was the first female cabinet minister. Also, she was an outspoken supporter of women's rights in Iran. Farrokhroh Parsa was executed by firing squad on May 8, 1980 in Tehran. I want to emphasize that all the people that were working in Kanoon was very outstanding figures, and all of them had to flee the country after the revolution or executed. Lili Amir Arjmand also decided to consider 12 mobile libraries. They took some buses from army and the army assigned these buses to Kanoon. She ordered to remove chairs and build some shelves and desks like an actual library. And these buses were visible on the cities. And also she asked for some Land Rover for difficult areas to cross, where there was not any roads. For example, these cars, they went to some rural areas or villages and meet with interested people who wanted to borrow books or talk about arts and culture and education. They educated all these librarians so they know what they are doing. For some places, when even Land Rover couldn't pass, they use mules for carrying books and delivering these books to eager people. And they were very interested and amused people who were waiting for these librarians. And also this is another picture. I want to talk about now about Kanoon Publishing Center. Of course, the Kanoon's mission was purchasing all the books published in Iran and providing these books to children. But those books were not enough, so they think of establishing their own publication in order to encourage authors. For starting this new mission, Farah Diba translated and painted the book The Sea Girl, written by Hans Christian Andersen, and gave it to Kanoon for publication. And from the proceeds of this book sale, Kanoon Publishing Center was established, and the number of urban and rural libraries increased. This is one of the first books that was produced in Kanoon. It's written by Samad Behrangi, The Little Black Fish, and it was published in Kanoon in 1968. Many consider The Little Black Fish to be a symbol of a revolutionary and intellectual young generation. The symbolic language of the story inspired many different writers and poets. The Little Black Fish has even been referred to as an unofficial statement and a manifesto of an underground Marxist-Leninist guerrilla organization in Iran. Nevertheless, Lili believes that this book was just a simple children's story. It was a story of a little black fish who wanted to leave a very small pond that she was leaving and going to the sea. And during her journey, there was so much challenges, and she faced too many creatures. Then dangerous situations, and they fight, and she fights, and at last she could reach herself to the sea. Kanoon was a prolific cultural producer, involving itself in everything from book publishing and book illustration to filmmaking, animation, theater, film festival, and conferences. The organization was in the vanguard of cultural production in Iran through 1970s, serving as a platform from which many of Iranians' most highly regarded creative minds launched their careers. Many incredible groups of artists, for example, Abbas Kiarostami, Nasser Taqvai, Bahram Beyzai, Pari Zangene, Simin Qadirian, and many other people that all people was a legend in my in my memory. Kanoon remains the single and most important cultural and educational network for children in Iran. And this is a picture of a street theater produced by Kanoon. And this is a picture of one of the first movies that was produced in Kanoon. And this is another very famous movie that was produced in Kanoon, Where is the Friend's House, in 1987, directed and written by Abbas Kiarostami. The plot depicts a conscientious schoolboy's attempt to return his friend's school notebook to his home in neighboring village to prevent the friend from being expelled if he fails to hand it in the next days. This film gained many awards in international festivals. Kanoon aimed to provide a supportive environment for children and young adults to explore various forms of art and intellectual development. It has focused on promoting creativity, critical thinking, and cultural understanding among Iranian youth. And like other educational theories, Kanoon had their own unique philosophies and methodologies. After the revolution, the first CEO of Kanoon, Mr. Zarin, he understood the value of Kanoon entirely and tried to not changing crucial things in center of Kanoon. In fact, about 10 years, Kanoon turned into an island as if the revolution hadn't happened there. But gradually the rules changed, and now Kanoon has become to a center for Islamic Republic's propaganda, and replacing such institution is impossible, in fact. At the end, I want to mention some very beautiful memory. Was one of the Kanoon's members. I dragged this memory from a documentary film, Kanoon, directed by Khater Khodai. Hassan Hassandouz, a film editor and a member of Library Number 4, says one day Mr. Shaybani, our filmmaking teacher, took children to Lashkarak Hills full of gardens, flowers, and plants. Then he took us 8mm cameras from the car and gave each of us a camera and told us to take a movie from this place. We went and started filming trees, plants, and river. We wondered why he didn't take us any script. But the interesting thing was that it didn't matter at all what this movie was going to be. The important thing was that children should look at nature properly and look for the things that are beautiful in nature, that is, see beauty. And these footage are from those 8mm films that children age 8 or 9 made that day. Thank you very much. And this is the story of Kanoon, one of the most important institutions in Iran.
Wow. Thank you so much, Simon. Just so inspiring, so beautiful. Let's see if you could stop sharing your screen, and oh, thank you. And so now we have braiding. Okay, Keisha, you're there. Yay. Braiding Black Herstories, a model for archiving the life of Grace Hampton. And you should have sharing capacities. We have a fantastic presentation for you, Simon, here in the chat.
Okay, I hope you can see it okay.
Yes.
So this study is really concerned with the historiography of African American women working in arts education of the 21st century specifically as artists, educators, administrators, mentors, and so much more. And women like Dr. Grace Hampton, they really exemplify this. And it's really my attempt to address this long tradition of educational inequities faced by the racialized field of art education in the United States, particularly where predominantly white institutional archives have not prioritized documenting women of color and other historically marginalized groups for various reasons. And so this is really the context of my presentation. And here, just looking at some statistics in the US, we can see here that Black women educators make up approximately 9% of the teacher workforce. In K through 12 specifically, we see here that it rises to 9.8. And then finally, my focus has just really been Penn State, which centers around me finding community and building community. We see a representation of only 4%. And so it kind of leads me to my project. So in fall 2023, as part of a colloquium project with Dr. Kiefer Boyd, who I think is here in that class, I was really intrigued with this notion of future commons and situating myself in the academy as I explored this idea of a contemporary ontology of racial placemaking through data visualization and this project called Coloring Equity. And so here you can see I'm trying to like visualize and illuminate the creativity of Black achievement and retention in the academy. And so this kind of visual here is a counter visual really that shows the almost invisible statistics of Black bodies in the academy represented by about 7.5% in the College of Arts and Architecture at Penn State. And so these numbers here we're looking at is just the preliminary data of what those retention numbers look like over a period of years, people serving within the institution. And more specifically, I'm looking here at Dr. Hampton. I was really struck that, you know, she's served within the institution for over 38 years. And so for me, I first met Dr. Hampton last year, this time surprisingly, and it was just through a friend, Carmen Wong, who's on the far left. And so Wong introduced us because of our alignment with arts, education, and community organizing. And so since then, I've really grown to be more acquainted with Hampton, and it's led to some professional collaborations. And it was really this sequential way of knowing through co-creation that has guided my research interest towards centering Hampton's voice to tell her story. And so we see here, these are just a few images, and I see one of my colleagues is here with us, Nashime Lindo, who is also a friend, and we see this community of Black women coming together, supporting each other, which is so important as a part of creating community. And so the image on the far right, it's of a panel discussion I organized in February in celebration of Black History Month, titled Black Women Arts Educators, the Legacy of African American Arts. And so Hampton was one of the panelists. And what was really interesting is that in her presentation, she centered her stories as a daughter, as a young woman, as a mother, as major influences to her professional career as an artist, as an educator, and an administrator in higher education. And so Hampton's perspective in aligning this with with my research and with her professional trajectory was important because it showed me how much the personal was important to the professional. And this idea of like Black feminist thinking that really threads how our intellectual and philosophical practices are grounded in our lives and the way we move through life. And so here is an image, the image of us all together as a community really struck me looking at that through my phone, through images that were shared through people that attended, like community. And how can I show the importance of this idea of Black cultural methods in addressing these historical and archival silences that continue to erase the contribution of women of color as educators, administrators in arts education. And so for this project, it's very much in preliminary stages. I'm really looking at these two theories, and there are several theories that are still at work to this study, but it really centers Grace's home as a living archive that draws from this idea of collective autoethnography, which is a participatory and democratic framework, which really is resting on foundational principles of autoethnography, participatory research, and narrative inquiry. So as co-creators, Hampton and I, we really agreed to work together to develop an archival method that would preserve her story, her work, her legacy as a multimodal kind of experiences that positions her as the archival author and then positions me as a mere researcher, right? Trying to really situate myself as a kind of support mechanism for her, centering her story and her living archive. And so we employ this idea of what's called Afro-femcentrism as a theory of art history and art making that focuses on the Black woman subject as depicted by the Black woman artist, exploring the distinct manner in which the latter really envisions and presents Black women's realities. And so this combination of collective autoethnography and Afrocentrism, the living archive as theoretical frameworks, they really articulate the unique ways that Black women communicate their experiences that tend to really speak to this creative and dialogical kind of way of being. And so I'm really centering Black women's personal and professional stories as a theoretical frame and theorizing that from this storytelling of through Black feminisms and Afrofemcentrism. And I think it really works to enacting this radical communal care for women of color, opening space to share our stories and our knowledge through cultivating community. And so here we see, I'm really thinking about artists that are centering home. And here we have Carrie Mae Weems, who's like staging and photographing in this kind of fictional drama in which she plays the lead with other cast members, his family and friends, etc. And she really focuses on the kitchen, and the kitchen has been traditionally a gendered space, particularly for women of color. And it has really been pictured as a site of importance. And so Weems turns that on his head and really suggests a kitchen table as this real stage where life's biggest moments happen and occur. And she plays that out through these moments here that we can see where Black women are caring for each other through this practice of grooming and caring for hair. And so I'm looking here at this next image, which is of December last year, where some of my colleagues and peers from class with Dr. Holt, we visited Hampton's home, and she invited us. And it was really special because here you can see classmates were really engaged in experiencing her space, her personal space as a living archive, a gallery of art, a record of life. And we were in community with her. And so this is really the impetus for this work and inspiring the way in which I'm navigating and thinking through this work. And so I'm really still working through a lot of the methodology. I'm really in early stages, but just sharing some of the ideas so far that I'm really engaged with. And I'm thinking about, critical portraiture and how I'm developing who she is, or we're developing who she is and how she's presented through this idea of context, voice, relationship, emergent themes, aesthetic whole, which is a theory by Pamela Harris Lawton. And then thinking about critical Black memory, which is the ways in which the visual, the photograph engages the viewer, right? Who is going to be engaging with her archive and how are they going to be engaging with her critical Black memory? And then thinking about the ways in which the archive is going to be presented. I'm thinking about the juxtaposition of home as an archive alongside institution. And then lastly, the kitchen, the home, and how that may be incorporated as a site of importance. And so I center this image because this is so important, because this is how I met Hampton. The image on the far left is her at the opening for the Juneteenth last year that she invited me to. And I included this photograph that I took in the Bahamas 4 years ago, and I titled it Grooming Practices, where women braid each other's hair. And so this mother is braiding her child's hair. And it just so happens that, a year later, I'm actually centering this work around who she is and how important her memory is. And so really you see here this juxtaposition of the professional identity, the institutional archive, which I'm trying to push back on the importance of how we present ourselves always through the professional as a distant memory. But as she's alive, she can tell her story and tell her story in a way that shows the personal and how that, like I mentioned in our presentation for Black History Month, is supporting or bolstering her professional. And you can see that through this juxtaposition of these images of her as a child, as a 7-year-old, top left, next to her as a 40-year-old working in her office, right? It really strikes you as being something that is important to her story, telling both narratives. And here we can see, again, institutional representation of her through newspaper articles, etc. And then what happens when we juxtapose that with artwork she's created, places she's lived, and what experience that will give to the individual who is engaging with her and who she is. And so this is really my method. I'm going to close with this brief video. I hope it plays for you guys. Yeah, better. Thank you so much.
Wow, it's so moving. I don't know if I'm just tired from the week, but it's like I was fighting back tears. So beautiful. Let's see, we have Celine and Carly. You able to share your screen?
Yep. Okay, can everyone see that?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, I'm going to get us started. So we're doing a collaborative collaborative feelings of archival encounters entering the Women's Caucus past. I'm Carly Sherman, a PhD candidate in art education and women's gender and sexuality studies at Penn State University. And my co-researcher is Celine O'Hara, PhD student in art education at Penn State University.
So our intent for this project was to combine our separate research interests, Carly's of wayfaring the Women's Caucus archives, to gather data to reach out to possible interviewees, and mine of observing and performing ways of being in the archive. We aim to fully immerse ourselves in collaborative archival methods, embracing, participating in, and reflecting on this approach. Given our mutual interest in feminist research methodologies and our roles as co-mentors, were firmly rooted in feminist archival theory. In outlining our process, we investigated the intersections between feminist archival theory and archiving practices, annotation, and wayfaring. Additionally, we drew upon co-research and co-mentorship theories and methodologies to guide our exploration. Highlighting the critical significance of co-mentorship and co-research in our project, we emphasized collaboration as central to our approach in feminist praxis. Building upon several theories, we claimed a position of co-mentorship as equal partners working together, allowing for the exchange of knowledge between one another. Feminist archival theory provided avenues for exploring alternative investigative archival approaches. By deconstructing the rigid constructs that define an archive, we open space for the emergence of archival imaginaries and intimacies. Anarchiving, as an additional feminist practice, questions the ethics of care, tending, and reciprocity in the circulation of archival information. Rather than one individual disseminating the histories, lives, and experiences of the past, it disrupts conventional archival practice and invites outsiders into the space within research creation processes.
So I wanted to share a bit of the Women's Caucus history just to get the ball rolling on the specific archive we entered into. We chose this archive as we are young feminist art educators that wanted to get a feel for the history of an organization that was relevant to our lives. And I'm also a current board member of the Women's Caucus, which is now known as the Coalition for Feminisms in Art Education, and I wanted to bring Celine into this space as well. So the Women's Caucus was unofficially formed in 1973 out of a direct need to address sexism in education, and specifically art education within national art education associations. The interest arose out of the members being affiliated with the National Women Artists Caucus and Second Wave Feminism. In 1975, the National Art Education Association's Board of Directors granted the NAEA Women's Caucus affiliate group status under the presidency of Judy Loeb. And then in 1999, the Women's Caucus is known as actually an issues group instead of an affiliate. And then 2023, the NAEA Women's Caucus is actually renamed to the Coalition for Feminisms in Art Education. And then citing, I know that from my lived experience within the caucus and our wayfaring activities we did within the archive. So when we talk about collaborative archival research, we're really pulling from three main sources. So using the archives as knowledge companions and being able to bring flesh to the teaching was something that we were really interested in, as we are also both studying to be art educators. And then further reporting on the effects of working together and having companionship within the archives. So building on not only our research or our knowledge companions, but also the relationship we have with one another through the archives. And then we have reflecting on the powers of collaborative research as activism, and that would be through reflexive becoming, proactive improvisation, and co-learning partnership. And this also introduced a model of collaborative autoethnography, revealing that feminist collaboration can become a part of everyday life. And then lastly, we identified the traits of feminist co-mentorship as a patriarchal dismantling process, specifically valuable in academic structures that me and Celine are working in that tend to prioritize that individualism.
So Dr. Holt introduced us to archival wayfaring and annotation. She shared the idea of engaging with archival annotation as a collaborative practice, using the artist Wendy Red Star as an example. So Wendy Red Star utilizes archival annotation in her series 1880 Crow Peace Delegations. In the picture shown here, that's a piece from that series. In this series, Red Star scans and manipulates historical portraits from the National Anthropological Archives. She adds personal handwritten notations in red ink. The written text includes observations and historical facts about the Crow delegations, a process that inspired autoethnographic reflections from her experiences as a Crow woman. This concept introduces the question, what happens when we dialogue in and with the archives? So inspired by Red Star's use of notation to provide a counter history and allow for personal reflection, annotation became a critical tool in our conversation with the Women's Caucus archive.
So now that we've given you a background of our process and where we situate ourselves theoretically, I wanted to talk a little bit about how we actually did our work, as we recently wrote a co-written paper that explores the whole thing and kind of our experiences that we got from it. So Celine and I originally began wayfaring within the actual archival space, so within that institutional framework. We immediately realized that that was not going to be a comforting space to dialogically interact with one another, especially when we reviewed the documents and saw the personal nature of much of the information. So using those feminist archival sensibilities we discussed earlier, we responded to the white glove and cataloging systems, as Springay et al. Note here, and proceeded to scan any document that we had sort of like a knee-jerk reaction with, printed them out, and began annotating over top of clear binder protectors. Most importantly, we did this within our homes, where we felt free to express ourselves and move between spaces and even time, since we could now have more than one box open at a time, theoretically. Our collection of archival materials were passed between the two of us. So in the next slide, you'll see a lot of our actual annotations. So Celine is marking points of interest in red, and I'm marking mine, or responding to Celine's in blue. You can see our dialogue was not only vocally generative as an ephemeral experience between the two of us that we refer back to when we reflect on our experiences, but also a physically documented one so we could look back at a later date as we move forward with different research trajectories from this point.
So now we're going to reflect on some of the archival documents that we responded to. So in particular, I was immediately drawn to the Women's Caucus pamphlets that were a part of the archives. I really loved the richness of their content, ranging from lecture schedules and artist biographies to curriculum descriptions and book reviews. They really left a lasting impression on me. This particular one was from the 1980s. I think it was from 88. And I asked Carly a lot of questions about the history of the materials as it pertained to the discipline of art education. So I was educated, my past education is in art history, theory, and criticism, and Carly's is in the discipline of art education. And I had a lot of trouble understanding the understanding its history and in regards to the discipline of art education. And so I was curious about the interdisciplinary focus at that time, and we quickly began to question what it meant historically. So Carly was able to give me context in relation to art education, and I was able to speculate in relationship to art history. And our conversation was speculative in nature, drawing from both the information presented to us and the gaps we observed in the archival materials. We drew upon our shared knowledge and experiences to formulate interpretations, and this can be further understood as engaging in a form of gossip, which gossip emerged as an active tool for navigating the uncertainties present within the materials. And our collaborative practice depended on gossip as a mode of feminist communication and as a tool for navigating the complexities within the archive. Furthermore, it became clear to me that the Women's Caucus was more than an organization. It became a space for women to share in their joy, intellect, and grief. The various forms of communication presented showed like long-lasting friendships that were carefully maintained and valued. They told stories to one another and shared their struggles as mothers, scholars, and artists. And one particular moment in the archive that was documented was Enid Zimmerman's speech for Mary J. Roos for the Memorial Award. Zimmerman provided a profound reflection on their friendship. Though heart-wrenching, it reflected so many of the relationships depicted in the archive, and it was a profound reflection of the co-mentoring, care, and grief.
So the documents that initially called to me, and I mean that really gathered my attention as they were also the first folder in our very first box. I spent about 25 minutes reading the email exchanges between Yvonne Gaudelis and Elizabeth Garber. These two women were co-presidents of the WC from 96 to 98, but I was really interested. There was a lot of conversation between the two of them through their email exchanges. And I saw this notion that I tend to refer back to in my own research. And now that I think that's true for Celine as well, as she's kind of come into the space with me, that idea of co-mentorship and specifically feminist co-mentorship. Their discussions were often professional in their needing to make decisions around different organizational duties. However, they discussed topics such as motherhood, family, the stresses of academia, and even more. So they were practicing this notion of feminist co-mentorship, and it speaks to this notion of feminist co-mentorship, and it is important to situate it through that feminist lens, as Godby and Novotny advocate for the practice and naming of feminist co-mentorship. The authors discuss how the acts of feminist co-mentorship privilege relational aspects. Co-mentors empower one another, work as proactive agents, and enter into a more holistic relationship rooted in a common goal. It takes this concept of power over, found in traditional mentorships, and transforms it into power with. So we're really seeing these two women who supported each other throughout the years, especially as Gaudelis was Garber's also dissertation chair. So we really see that carried through their entire relationship, and it's something that really gravitated towards me. So this is our grand takeaway from the experience, and it was also the sense of reassurance as we just met each other this year, and we have what we kind of classify as a blossoming feminist friendship. So it's a research that focuses on the feminist epistemology of friendship, and this was my first time actually encountering such work, and I was very clear that this was something that was very largely supported within the Women's Caucus space over the years through the archives. And even in the relationships that I see today, especially since I'm a board member and interact with many of the women involved, many of the people involved. So Taylor and Klein discuss in their enactment of feminist epistemologies of friendship, referring to their own collaborative scholarship and personal friendship as the reasoning behind their academic survival and success. They write, feminine relationships and feminine ways of knowing are marginalized in the academy. Our belief is that we do not have to comply. So we begin to attend to the feminist epistemology of friendship, where we construct knowledge collaboratively, allowing for space to individually generate ideas that we weave together, but tending to our relationship and being there for one another supersedes all else. So we are committed to doing this work against the grain of individualism of the academy, much like our feminist art educator foremothers. And that is all we have for you today.
Thank you so much. Okay, it is my turn. I'm going to open up my slides. Okay, Google Chrome, I guess I have to go. Nope, that's not it. Hold on. Stop share. I gotta open it first. Here we go. Okay. So I'm going, the title of my talk is Cultivating in and Within Living Archives of Arts and Culture, Feminist Teaching Conversations. And this is kind of a reflection on what that means to cultivate in and within living archives. And it draws also from my own research journey, my dissertation work. Karen Kiefer Boyd, who's in the room here, was my advisor. I'm going to start with this image, which was, so when I got involved in this and in archives and that, I was really like having to sort of suss out what is it that, how do I see archives? Because I was new to it. I had done archival research and I was very interested in it, but I hadn't really had an opportunity to understand archival theory. So this image is sort of myself in the middle of this networked sort of configuration of like knowledge and people talking and sharing knowledge and different areas of knowledge. And that sort of came out of how I was thinking about history. So this is my master's thesis in which I was trying to fill in the gaps of my own understanding of art education history, which I didn't have because I'd come from a studio background. And so I was delving into actually Penn State history because I grew up in that area. And so my teachers, my educators had come from that sort of Penn State legacy. And I'm just going to go to really what I think essentially at this time in my life, what was sort of drawing me to these spaces. So Diane Korzenik, who is an art education history researcher and scholar, says, in terms of the choices and motives in doing this work, she says, a person doing the research is haunted by a feeling, a memory, an experience. And this autobiographical motive comes from wondering, why does this matter so much to me? What drives me to want to understand, know, and master this pastime? And so for me, it was because I had been raised in that Penn State area in State College and had grown up there. I really wanted to kind of go back into what I felt was kind of my own, maybe my own legacy. And so I'm going to start here, but also then go back to this a little bit. But what I was finding in the archive, or what was sort of moving me through those spaces, were I guess what Carly also says as like knee-jerk reactions, the things that you just gravitate to. And so sometimes these things can be, a struggle or something that really speaks to your soul, something that, that inspires you to create something that you want to share with someone else, might provoke a question or surprise you. And so it was really in this kind of like wayfaring sort of way that I was embodied researching in the archive that I was coming to this work. And this is an image of Victor Lowenfeld. This was before he was teaching at Penn State. This is at the Hampton Institute at the time, now Hampton University. And within that research, I was finding histories that were pre-Penn State, pre-Penn State experience, and but was very much Penn State history, because many of the people that are seen, John Biggers is sitting here in front of his painting, they came to Penn State to follow him. And it also turned out that Victor Lowenfeld hired the first Black full-time faculty at Penn State. And so it was in this period of doing my research during my master's that I came across Mary Godfrey, who was that first hire. And so in sort of digging deeper, the only thing that came up in that archive at Penn State was this card that basically just talked about, it's from an article, but it basically just talks about her retiring after 22 years. So this hook just sort of made me realize how powerful that space is in terms of being a scholar in that space, trying to put together clues, but also what's absent. And so I really focused on trying to answer those questions that were being raised in that initial research. And also, in a sense, developing a kind of theoretical framing for how I understood what it was that was happening to me as a researcher when I'm in the archives. So I held on a bit to Kirsten Latham's work, a museum scholar. She's talking about the kinds of tangible, tactile kinds of experiences it is to be able to touch materials and to think about their potentiality in engaging with them. So she says, archival material seems to be especially rich with potential, since the process of discovery is always possible. New mixings, new knowledge, the physicality of the materials, original manuscripts, all create an environment ripe for experiencing. So long as the conditions are right for the coming together of the viewer, the time, the place, and the material under review. And I feel like this is kind of coming through in a lot of the presentations that we're looking at. I was also interested in Elizabeth Ellsworth's places of learning. So thinking about the archives as a site for these kinds of experiences. She says, I wonder what might happen to how we teach if we design pedagogies for ourselves that put us as educators in relation to education's outside. If we broke up closed circuits of exchange of ideas, identities, and practices inside education. So I was really thinking about how the archives and these materials and these encounters with materials come together. And this came out of a graduate assistantship in the libraries, and then for 2 years, and then in digital scholarly communications for another 2 years, and just really getting embedded in this archival space. And at the same time, kind of perfect storm situation, Dr. Karen Kiefer Boyd was doing her magic and making it possible to have the Judy Chicago Art Education Collection come to Penn State University, and coordinating teaching conversations around the archive as a living archive. So we've had some examples of that in terms of thinking about like activating these materials, what a living archive might mean because it's generative, it's pedagogical, and it creates spaces for transdisciplinary knowledge production. So my dissertation was looking at user experience with archives, which is a very library focused centric kind of term, but basically what is the experience we have when we're in the archive? And I was taking that along in conjunction with feminist teaching conversations, which Dr. Karen Kiefer Boyd put together more formally with faculty across Penn State in collaboration with Judy Chicago's Art Education Collection. And so there's a QR code to get to the site, but Karen also created a website that was generative as well. So this in and of itself becomes part of the archive of Judy Chicago. And there's all kinds of links that you can also that have spun out of this collection coming in. And so my dissertation, what really came out of this study in terms of, I interviewed faculty who were working with the collection. I was also really thinking about my own experiences in the archive, and it became just really thinking about feminist ways of being in the archive. So the sustained opportunities for dialogue, pedagogical support around the collections. We're seeing that in Carly and Celine's presentation, as well as in Keisha's. And so that dialogic aspect of it and this kind of teaching that's both known or implicit and explicit that's coming out of the materials. Thinking about the archive in terms of arts-based pedagogy, what is annotating an archive? What does that look like? It's very visual, and it's very beautiful aesthetically. It's an aesthetic exploration in these materials. So thinking about archives as a studio space. The archive offering opportunities for transdisciplinary projects. So basically what is generated out of there is multidisciplinary. It's not necessarily housed in one area of knowledge or another. It's generative. So archives also is a social space, dialogue and speculation as ways of using the archive. So really thinking about the people more than the materials. Because archives are basically inactive until they're activated by those who are using them. And also archives as a feminist space, this kind of way, co-mentorship, collaboration, dialogue around these materials, kind of critically questioning them, transforming the materials themselves is a very feminist way of working. And so using this kind of approach, this feminist sensibility around the archives, it values this multiplicity, the complexity, which also comes through in this image that I created before I even really came to these archival theoretical homes for myself. And in terms of thinking about these ideas of things that are actually in conversation or they're activated and connected. And it really is something that's unique to what feminists have brought to the archive is really thinking about it as a central part of our scholarship as a site to activate and to produce knowledge and also for activism. And so Kate Acorn, who is a feminist archivist, is basically recognizing the archive as a practice, and it's a space, a site upon which these various forms of resistance can hinge. So where this kind of brought me in terms of how I was thinking about or trying to create these kinds of experiences in the archives is really came out of probably started in 2013 while I was still at Penn State and working in the archives and very much embedded in that. So thinking about this, the invitation is really important here. There's reasons why maybe the home is a more comfortable space for this work. And archives can be quite contested because of this kind of institution versus home space for materials. And so in thinking about archives as something that's stewarded over time, these ways of being able to kind of invite those who aren't necessarily familiar with materials. Oftentimes these structures are set up that you have to have the knowledge already to then access it. And this sort of changes things where you can just kind of travel in the work, kind of listen to those conversations or open yourself up for possibility and potential for being able to kind of hold or stir memories through the materials. So really just being like fully in that space to allow yourself to engage. And so wayfaring archives for me has really been this sense of being in the archive to be in conversation with materials, with yourself, with others. You saw with Carly and Celine. And this is happening over time and space, past, present, future is all kind of converging in these things. And with this openness to discovery and at the same time being okay to not finish because you really can only step into it for a short time because it's like detective work. Let me just try to. Okay, so if we think about like activating the archive as a feminist action of understanding the self or re-understanding the self, other and world, it's really an embodied experience. So going back to this, so maybe leading into these activities in this way where you don't know really what you're going to find, and this kind of draws also in line with Rebecca Solnit's Field Guide to Getting Lost. So she says the things we want are transformative, and we don't know or only think we know what is on the other side of that transformation. Love, wisdom, grace, inspiration. How do you go about finding these things that are in some ways about extending the boundaries of self into unknown territory, about becoming someone else? And it really sums up kind of how I see archival experiences in terms of generating ways of inquiry and kind of finding your way through those materials. And that's it. Let's see. We have got Nasha. Are you there?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yes. Okay.
Okay, but you can't see me.
We can't see you, but that's.
No, I've tried everything. So, but I do have, if I share my screen, hopefully the PowerPoint.
Yeah, see if you can share your screen, and if not, I've got your slides.
Okay, so desktop, PowerPoint, we'll shift. Okay, I don't know what's going on.
Do you want me to share?
Yeah, I think you have to. I don't know what's going on here. It's just not helping. Wait a minute, let me try this.
How about I'll just share because we're about 1:37, so we gotta.
Yeah, it's just not letting me do anything. It keeps asking me for all these passwords that I don't have.
Oh yeah. All right. So we got this. And I want to say that this is just such a great way to end this, given that we are. Wait, I gotta share my full screen here. All right. I think that is that. Are you all seeing this?
I see it. Does everybody else see it?
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
So hopefully we'll have time for some discussion and questions and that.
Okay. All right. Well, my presentation is after much arm twisting by Anne. I'm doing my piece on the Coast to Coast National Women of Color Artist Book Project, which was initiated by Faith Ringgold. And I met Faith in 1987 when she had a show at the Baltimore Museum of Art of her story quilts. And she started telling me about this project working with women of color from all over the country that she had met, you know, during her exhibition history and her work in the women's movement. And I'm just going to read a few of Faith's words that are from the actual book that is here. Can you have to control it, Ann? Because I'm not controlling it. It's not going to the next slide. Yeah. Yeah. So what they did was they actually eventually, after having the exhibition organized, they were able to publish a small catalog through the Flossie Martin Gallery in Virginia. So what Faith says is that since the 1970s and the beginning of the women's movement, she dreamed of a network of women artists committed to bringing women of color into the mainstream of American art. She tried to work for change with men in the 60s, which were mostly white, and mostly white women artists in the 70s. I'm sorry, the men were not mostly white, but the women were. The issue of women artists of color network became her most immediate concern because it had the most to do with her. In 1986, Ophelia Garcia, who was the president of the Women's Caucus for the Arts, appointed her as vice president of Minority Affairs, and she sat on the national board. This was soon after her mother's death, and Faith speaks frequently about the impact her mother's death had on her, because in the beginning of her painted quilt process, her mother had collaborated with her on many of her objects. So she was really having a difficult time, and this kind of gave her an opportunity to have something to focus on and help her to get past the pain of losing her mother. Through her association with the caucus, she became a part of the National Network of Artists, and they were concerned with cultural, social, and political change. However, she had very little success in networking with other women of color in or outside of the Women's Caucus for the Arts. So she proposed to the New York chapter that there be a caucus of women of color that was supported by the WCA. And in 1987, the idea of a caucus within a caucus as a way to involve women of color began gaining acceptance.
Am I okay on this slide, Nasha?
Okay, so go to the next slide, Faith. And there's Faith during this time, and behind her you'll see one of her painted story quilts. And during this time she was actively traveling and exhibiting that work. What I didn't know was that she had initially come to Oakland, California to stay with her friend Moira Roth, who was an art historian, critic, and writer, and they talked about the idea of this project. Then she got in touch with a number of women of artists in the Bay Area through Ann Meredith, who was a photographer, and the discussion centered around what was the Women's Caucus for the Art, what is an artist book, and how could they make those two things come together. So they decided to come up with this idea, the Coast to Coast, a Women of Color National Artist Book Project. Then she met with people in Los Angeles, in Santa Monica. They had a meeting. There were Latino, African American, Asian, and Native American artists at that meeting, including Betty Saar, Barnett and Stephanie Honeywood, Anita Hoagland, Julia Nee Chu, Diane Gamboa, Alma Lopez, Gloria Longval, and Rosalind Mesquita. When they got back to New York, they appointed Clarissa Sly as the East Coast coordinator. Can you go to the next slide?
Sure.
And you can see some of the people who were part of the National Projects Committee. On the front row, there's Carmen Sanchez, Clarissa Sly, Lisa Yee. On the second row is Lotus Doe Brooks, Marcia McNair, Carol Bayard, and of course there's Faith. And on the back row is Bisa Washington, Miriam Hernandez, Sharon Jadis, and Michelle Godwin. Also included in that group were Beverly Singer, Diosa Summers Fitzgerald, Tomia Arai, Deborah Willis, and Margaret Gallegos. So you can see it was an array of artists who were very, very, very not only important artists at the time, but have become even more influential in the world of the arts and in education in the current times. So Coast to Coast organized their exhibition, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you several of the books that were in the exhibit that I was able to work with the Baltimore Museum of Art, where I was working at the time, the City of Baltimore, and an organization called the U.B. Blake Cultural Arts Center. I got the funding so that we did a collaborative project, and the project, you can go to the next slide.
Okay.
Just going to kind of talk about the, because there's so many different books and they have different titles and some of them are collaborations, etc. But the biggest part of this collaboration was getting the City of Baltimore, the Museum of Baltimore, to collaborate with the Community Arts Center so that we could actually show the books in Baltimore. So let's just kind of go through some of the books. And you can see the album for the homeless, that's Tomia Arai. Art Crow, Jim Crow is Howardina Pendell. And I'm not going to know every artist with every book, but let's just keep going, Anne. Bessie Smith, Empress of the Blues. You can see the Native American influence, the African American historical influence. Keep going. All right. So you can see that the books are in very different formats. Now, unfortunately, they weren't able to do this catalog in color. So you don't see the real impact of what the books look like, but you can see the form. Keep going. Go ahead. I actually wrote an essay for the catalog. It was called Stepping into Beauty and Power, a new guide for bibliophiles. The book, by definition, is something regarded as a subject for study, a body of facts and circumstances connected with a person, a culture, or a theme. Traditionally, books are used to package ideas, record or list things, and to propagandize. Knowledge is to be gained by reading them. Most books are conceived and constructed to function as a means of communicating concerns, documenting ideas, or simply entertained through the medium of the written word. But some books combine illustration with text to enhance the message. Coast to Coast, a Women of Color National Book Artist Project, fuses the literary and visual art forms into an integral format, which is very different from most illustrated books. In the case of Coast to Coast, the book becomes the idea and the art. And then I just kind of talk a little bit about each different, well, not each different artist, but a number of the artists whose books kind of stood out to me. Keep going. This is the one book on the left is Clarissa Sly's What's Happening with Mama. And what's interesting about that book, unfortunately, the photograph doesn't show that with each page, it opens out to a set of stairs that goes up into this house form. On the left is, on the right, at the bottom, the book that really stands out to me was a book by Elizabeth Catlett, who also participated in a project. She had 12 lino cuts in this book, and I tried to get the museum to purchase her book in particular because it was Elizabeth Catlett. And the question came back to me, who is Elizabeth Catlett? Which shocked me. Unfortunately, I didn't think to buy the book myself at the time. I think she was charging like $100, $900 for it, and I just didn't think I could afford it. But this book project traveled to several galleries, diverse works in Houston, Texas. It went, of course, it came to the UB Blake Center in Baltimore. It went to the Flossie Martin Gallery in Radford, Virginia, who actually produced the catalog for the book. It went to the Artemisia Gallery in Chicago, and then back to the Artist Place, the Artist Book Place in New York. So it traveled all over, and it gained a lot of traction. As a result of that, let me see, is there another slide after that, Anne? Mm-hmm. Okay, you can see these are some more ways that people even using gourds for the actual book itself. Is there one more? Okay, last slide didn't come.
That's a book. Okay.
I know. I mean, and it's kind of a traditional book using the gourds to tell stories and to contain the stories. But the following, I thought I had added another slide, which is the next project that they did called Ancestors Known and Unknown. And it was boxworks. And so these various artists got together and they started to make boxes. And I didn't include that in my presentation. And now that I'm thinking about it, maybe that would have been a good kind of juxtaposition. But the boxworks were talking about boxes as containers of stories and histories and feelings and thoughts that women have. And that, again, traveled to a number of these same galleries and including some other galleries. And then the final project that they did, which did not come to fruition, was a quilt project. And everybody was supposed to make a patch for the quilt. I ended up being a part of the boxwork project. Faith encouraged me to include a piece of mine in that project. And then I did a quilt patch, but it disappeared into the netherworld. I have no idea whatever happened to that patch. The entire project sort of petered out because I guess leadership is hard, you know, when you try to have a national organization and work and mother and wife and make art and all of those things. And the reality of that sort of came to fruition. So the quilt project never came to fruition. But this, for me personally, working with Faith, first as a museum educator and in her gallery when she was with Bernie Steinbaum, it was a transformative experience for me. I learned so much from her. And she was a catalyst. She was a motivator. She was an educator. She opened doors to so many artists, women, women of color, men. She was unabashed in her opinions about things. So she would tell you exactly how she felt. Up until the very end. And so I wanted to put this together and I kind of did it very quickly, and as you know, but I wanted to do it in honor of Faith Ringgold, my friend and my mentor, and who's now an ancestor.
Wow.
Thank you.
Thank you.